Blessed Sabbath to you. I'm recording this whilst on holiday, so a bit of a different background here. I hope everyone is keeping well and that you enjoy the next set of teachings that I'll be doing over the next few weeks. Deciding to focus on the Pharisaic yeast of the Messianic Jewish movement, of Messianic Judaism. And so I'll be doing this over the next few weeks, and I think this is quite important, a topic to speak on. And you'll see from various Messianic Jewish websites and YouTube and wherever, often this claim that Yeshua was a Pharisee, and Yeshua is a Pharisee, and it comes in different forms that you get this view. But it really has a low Christology, and even sometimes you get the sense of like they want to convince you that Yeshua placed himself under teachings of Rabbi Hillel, or he was in the house of Shammai, or he wasn't of Shammai, but he was, and some of the context of the discussions of the Gospels are actually these are just internal Pharisaic arguments, but he was actually a Pharisee himself. It also comes sometimes with some pressure, especially on those of the Hebrew roots, that how can you leave the traditional Pharisaic calendar that was developed in the 4th century and do something different, and you're not for the unity, and you're not showing the Jewish Messiah. And so there's often a lot of guilt, but also you see there's a lot of a picking and choosing, because often people claim to be following the scepter of Judah, or rabbinic Judaism is the interpretation, but they never define where it begins or ends. It's just some picking and choosing, cherry picking, whatever they want. But we see this again and again, that they will say, many Messianic Jews will say, they won't say he's in a scene, they won't say that he is a zealot, or Karaite, or whatever tradition, Sadducean, whatever. They will often just focus on this one and say he was a Pharisee. And well, to back this up, there really needs to be quite a bit of quote mining, as it were. And the famous one that they often bring up is that one of Matthew chapter 23. Actually, it's one of the biggest takedowns of the Pharisaic sect, but they just take the first verse, which through the Greek has come to be read as saying, "The scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, all therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not ye after their works, for they say and do not." Now, for many of us who are familiar with Yeshua's teachings, we're just not going there. We're not going to be saying that all therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that this could ever be talking about their oral law. There is just no way. It would defy too many passages of scripture. But still, people love to couch in here to kind of force the bits of Phariseeism that they like, and to say that actually Messianic Christian expression of the commandments should follow the bits of the tradition that they like. Now, because of this reading being somewhat problematic, although not really, because you could read it as they sit in Moses' seat, therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, the context could be about Moses' teaching. Stick to the Bible, stick to the Word. You could interpret it that way, but some people have gone to various Hebrew manuscripts, looked at different renderings of this verse. One of them is quite interesting. I think the version of that Hebrew manuscript comes out of Vatican, where it's a little bit more like the Sermon on the Mount, where it is, you have heard it said, the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, therefore whatsoever they bid you to do and observe. That's quite an interesting rendering. And then another one that's quite famous, what came from what's called the Shem Tov Hebrew Matthew. And it was Ross Nichols, he did a very interesting paper. And Nehemiah Gordon picked up on that, where it reads a little bit different, where the Hebrew there says, therefore whatever he, all therefore whatsoever he bid you observe. That could also work well with emphasizing Moses. And we've got to understand our master is Messiah Yeshua. We cannot love any tradition more than him. And if he says there is a yeast of the Pharisees, we really need to understand this. We can understand with the Sadducees, there was their yeast was a lot of political corruption. They weren't prepared as well to embrace angels and demons and the supernatural and the prophets and the writings. The zealots, maybe they needed to learn a bit more, render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Chief priests and scribes, turning the temple into a den of robbers. But when it comes to the Pharisees, we need to hear our master and what he was teaching. The Messiah came and he definitely taught, if there's one thing, it is their traditions, that their interpretation leads to traditions that do not honor the commandments of God. You get this from Matthew chapter 15 and Mark chapter 7. So we can rightfully ask, what is it about their tradition that Messiah saw as being having yeast? And I think it's well summed up a couple of verses after Matthew 23, verse 3. Verse 5, just a couple of verses later, he says, but all their works they do for to be seen of men. They make broad their phylacteries and enlarge the borders of their garments. Also going to the Hebrew, what's interesting here in possible Hebrew manuscripts of Matthew, which the church fathers spoke about, I've always felt that phrasing just doesn't make sense, because it seems to be just one step too far, because the whole idea of the phylactery is itself just a corruption of scripture, what they call tefillin, the bindings, where they bind on their forehead and on their hand, and it's taken from Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 8 and 9. Then the issue is that much of scripture has things like you impress the commandments on your children, you are to inscribe it on the heart, you are to write it on your doorposts, on your gates, on your forehead, on your hand. And these were idioms. And literally we have signs of, within the rabbinic order, within Phariseeism, this making an idiom something to be seen by men, which is just a fruit that is happening. And the phylactery is early, but I don't think Yeshua was actually mentioning the phylactery here. But anyway, just so you know, it was there in the first century, this interpretation of these boxes. I believe originally they were round, but Josephus does say they wear these phylacteries on their foreheads and on their arms, and they take care that they should be made entirely made of the most precious metals. So that's quite interesting. Archaeologically, however, I don't think the write it on your gates and on your doorposts had led to the idea of mezuzot, the mezuzah. We're not finding those from archaeology, so really these were idioms. And well, anyway, we just see this tradition makes things showy that perhaps should not be. Now, again, what's interesting with the different Hebrew manuscripts is some will actually, rather than that phrasing, it actually would suggest they wear great decorations on their garments. And this seems more fitting with the idea of they clean the outside of the cup of whited sepulchres, because there's nothing wrong with having beautifully decorated garments. The whole issue, though, is that should not be the focus. What's more important is the inside, as it were. And you even see this with the idea of tzitziot, or embellished borders, however we understand that. Again, even in Deuteronomy 22, when it says you shall have a gedil, some highlight. We'll speak about the four corners of your vestment, and even reading into that, many will say, well, it needs to be a four-cornered garment, and there's no reason to believe that that's not how Hebrews spoke. In fact, we know that's kind of idiom. Various scriptures we can see this with, but especially with the idea of the four corners of the earth. That comes through many scriptures, Isaiah, Book of Revelation. It's not actually talking about four corners. It's the idea of north, east, west, and south, and the breadth or the extremities. So, to make this again, you must wear a four-cornered garment. No, there's something to happen on the extremities, whatever the tzitzit is. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely something about the tzitzit. There's a ribbon of blue that is mentioned. And however Messiah interpreted it, we know that, well, it would have been modest and, well, just in the right spirit of it. That yes, when he returns, he will be glorious and he will be in great apparel and it will be beautiful and he will be outwardly clothed and adorned beautifully, both inside and out. But even when he came in a humbled form, we know the description there, he had no form, he had no majesty, there was no beauty to attract us to him. What attracted the people to him, it was not his garments, he didn't seem to have that wealth. But rather, it was, as the apostles would say, yours are the words of life. And the eyes were the windows to the soul. There was something about this man. And so just a very different sense there. And I know also we try and make him distinct as when we render Messiah, we're trying to make him look a certain way and stand out a bit. I don't know to what degree he did. Often we do it by making his hair a bit longer. But I assure you, he's not a hypocrite in terms of his Torah. And if speak of the priests one day in Ezekiel that they will trim the hair of their heads, we have a sense that he would have had a modest sense of grooming, and that's another important part, is the idea of the clothing of hair. I'm just telling you right now, Yeshua is not coming back with peyot. And sometimes, some things are self-evident of you are not interpreting this right. And another one is with women's covering, because this is also a bit of a sad one within the Pharisaic tradition. I don't know if it was this case in the first century, but in Numbers chapter 5, we read of when the priest would do that ritual to uncover a woman's head. They interpret this as a cloth covering that you would get when you got married. And that's not what it's talking about. It's led to some really interesting ideas. And even to the point that the idea of your hair being seen is to expose your nakedness in marriage. We can see this in a variety of cultures, how this has led to just some terrible treatment of women. And you even have some women, I think it's called a shtetl, where they will shave all their hair and wear these wigs. And it's just, again, you have to step back and say, is this what Messiah gave at the mountain? And the answer is clearly a no. But when you read 1 Corinthians 11, and it's amazing that people use 1 Corinthians 11 to try and advocate for Pharisaic head coverings, where Paul actually went against his tradition there in the things that he says, like verse 15, but if a woman have long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given her for a covering. You can see what the covering is, and if to uncover her, what that would mean. Verse 6, for the woman be not covered, also let her be shorn. But if it be a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her be covered. And this is quite interesting because I think today it's seen very strange, Paul saying of women refraining from authority, but just not really understanding the idea of how a woman is to be clothed. It's like they have the sign of beauty, they all want that kind of long hair, but not understanding the social contract of what this represents and God's order within what that speaks of. But anyway, within all these things that we see of what spirit, what we're to be clothed with, what is seen, what is shown, all these things, we know Messiah has a healthy modesty in a good place. And sometimes you can look at your tradition, you just know you're down a wrong path and you need to change course. I think of Colossians, and I think Paul was mainly dealing with Gnostics here, but it's the same, or asceticism, people who are saying, okay, I'm not doing this, and I'm refraining from this, I'm not touching this, this, and this. But often in these ways of interpreting scripture, it actually leads to a kind of vanity of it actually leads to a kind of vanity and a showiness, which is kind of counterintuitive, but it happens. I've got a couple of scriptures here, and I think this parallels Phariseeism. Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after the Messiah. Wherefore, if you be dead from Messiah, from the rudiments of the world, why, as though living in the world, are you subject to ordinances? Now, clearly this isn't talking about the commandments of God. This is just man-made things, or reading into the commandments of God, man ideas that are just not naturally coming forward. Touch not, taste not, handle not, which ought to perish with the using after the commandments and doctrines of men. The Malachi of the Son of God, the Messiah, he is not a Pharisee. He didn't interpret the same way as they do. His eisegesis, there was no eisegesis, exegesis. It was coming from the scriptures, he is not to be conformed to any tradition, and we should not do that. And so, and it's not anti-Semitism. This is something that the Jewish nation needs to deal with, just like many other traditions. We all need to deal with this. It will all submit to the tradition that is Messiah, the law. He is the ultimate law. He is the truth. And so next week I will be talking about how Messianic Judaism, I think it's a really bad move that they've made to try and make Phariseeism or Pharisaic interpretation as equating the scepter of Judah. It just isn't. We will see, no, the scepter is Messiah, and we should keep the Torah the way he kept it, and that's where the unity, ultimate unity, will come from. So anyway, I hope this has been a blessed year, and may you have a blessed Sabbath. Much love and shalom.